Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into the heat-shimmering sands of ancient Mesopotamia, where the skies feel heavy and the future, well, the future gets read straight from the liver of a dead sheep. You kneel beside a fire pit as a priest, robed, silent, and covered in ash, draws a blade across the sheep's belly. The sun is rising, birds are watching, and you're somehow expected to understand what the curve of that bile duct means for next week's harvest. Yeah, you probably will not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck through the thick linen curtain of the ziggurat's inner sanctum. It smells like incense, stale blood, and cooked barley. Outside, the tigress groans in the summer heat. Inside, everything is quiet, dangerously quiet. You are a guest of the gods tonight, and their language is viscera. A priest named Namtaru greets you without a word. His face is tattooed with celestial markers, tiny stars inked beneath each eye. He gestures for silence and beckons you forward. On a stone slab lies the offering, a freshly slaughtered lamb, its abdomen carefully opened, revealing a glistening red-brown liver. You try not to stare, but it gleams in the candlelight like some unholy jewel. This is extispacy, the ancient practice of divining the will of the gods by inspecting entrails, especially the liver. It sounds like the plot of a bad horror movie, but for the Babylonians, this was science, or at least what passed for it. You glance down. The liver has ridges, lobes, strange discolorations. Each one means something. To the untrained eye, it is just meat, but to the Bur, the priest diviner, it is a weather map, a political forecast, and a spiritual barometer all at once. And today, they are reading for signs of a coming storm, a real one, or perhaps something worse. In Mesopotamia, the weather was not just inconvenient. It was survival or starvation. A flood could wipe out your entire barley crop. A drought could invite disease. So predicting the weather was not just about staying dry. It was about staying alive. And since Babylonian gods were famously moody, the people assumed that nature was their primary mood ring. Every shift in the sky reflected divine emotion. Rain? Enlil is pleased. Dust storm? Marduk is punishing someone. Hail the size of pomegranates? Someone probably lied during a ritual. You peek at the priest again. He's rotating the liver gently, murmuring in Sumerian. His apprentice scribbles cuneiform symbols onto a clay tablet, recording the observation with the urgency of someone noting a stock market crash. Historians still argue whether these liver readings were entirely religious or partially observational. After all, over centuries, priests developed a huge compendium of liver-based predictions. They were categorized meticulously. If the gallbladder is shriveled, it might mean a hot, dry wind from the west. If the caudate lobe is enlarged, there could be flooding in the east. It sounds arbitrary, because it is. But over time, The priests had noticed real patterns in seasonal changes and encoded them in sheep guts. Quirky tidbit time, they sometimes named the livers. Yes, a particularly dramatic one might be remembered in local lore as the angry tongue of Shamash or the twisted mirror of Nergal, basically celebrity organs. And it was not all about the liver either. The ritual involved incense, chants, sometimes music, and even timed sacrifices. If the sheep bleated in a certain way or kicked its legs in a death twitch, it could change the reading. You had to be part meteorologist, part therapist, part improv actor. You shift your weight. The stone under your knees is colder than expected. The priest looks up, frowns, then waves a hand as if to say, "It is not good." His apprentice gasps. The crowd outside shifts nervously. Someone whispers, "There will be lightning." Outside the temple, rumors spread like floodwater. The river will swell. The barley will rot. Lightning will strike the fields. All because a sheep's liver was misshapen on the left edge. And here's the kicker. They believed it. These weren't just ignorant peasants. Babylonian society was literate, architecturally advanced, and mathematically sharp. They tracked Venus with shocking accuracy. But weather? That was still the gods' department. And sheep were their messengers. You follow the priest to the temple's terrace. He points to the horizon. The sky is clear for now, but you know better. That liver said lightning. The liver knows something. So you wait. You wait with the farmers, the scribes, the terrified generals. You wait as a breeze picks up and dust flicks across the stones. And somewhere, high above, the gods decide whether or not to flip the weather switch. You blink against the rising wind as the temple priest descends from the terrace. The murmurs below rise into full-on chatter. Some folks are already covering their barley granaries with woven mats. Others pray, hoping the priest was wrong, that the liver had twitched for some other reason, maybe indigestion. But you know that is wishful thinking. No one wants a storm. Yet here, storms are more than meteorological. They are messages. And the messengers? Not gods, not clouds. Priests. More precisely, the burr. You might have pictured a Babylonian priest as some wild, bearded old man chanting under the stars. And yes, sometimes they were. But brew, the discipline of divination, was a deeply formal art studied for decades. You could not just show up and declare, "I shall now interpret a spleen." No, this was like medical school, only with fewer cadavers and more sacred cows. Or sheep, rather. You see, becoming a burr was like being selected for a secret society. Usually, you were born into it. The role often passed from father to son, with children trained from an early age to recognize every wrinkle on a sheep liver and every twitch in the heavens. In a small side room of the temple, you catch sight of an apprentice barely 12, muttering the names of liver parts under his breath. Hepatic vein, mirror of Shamash, gate of Anu. His fingers move over a clay model shaped like a sheep liver, each segment inscribed with signs. He pokes at a lobe and whispers, "Danger from the east," and you realize this kid is not just memorizing names. He is learning to see the divine in the viscera. To be a burr was to be the interpreter between gods and humans. While others watched stars or read omens in dreams, the burr went straight to the guts. And if the gods were angry, well, their rage left its imprint in tissue. But they did not work in isolation. In fact, the diviners often collaborated with Upsar Enma Anu Enlil, scribes who specialized in astronomical omens. One might say, Jupiter is near the lion, which means floods. And the burr might reply, confirmed, the liver's gallbladder has shifted left. Disaster looms. It was a team effort in predicting doom. And yes, even here, politics slithered in. Sometimes, a burr would be summoned by the king himself, not for a casual forecast, but for a make or break reading. Should we attack the Elamites next week? Will the royal marriage displease the gods? Is that comet a sign of my impending doom? High-stakes stuff. Imagine being handed a sheep and knowing your ruler's fate, and maybe your own, depends on what you see in its organs. Historians still argue whether the burr truly believed their own readings, or if some of them faked the signs to align with royal wishes. After all, when your job security depends on keeping the king happy, you might accidentally misread a benign liver as a favorable omen for conquest. But there were limits. If you claimed every liver said, all is well, people would start to notice when locusts devoured their wheat. So most burr walked a fine line, interpreting just enough gloom to seem wise, and enough hope to keep the harvest prayers flowing. Quirky tidbit. During major rituals, the diviners sometimes consulted multiple livers in one day. Yes, an entire lineup of sheep, each inspected for backup omens, like polling a flock for divine consensus. And if two livers disagreed, that meant the gods were conflicted. Or maybe the sheep were. Either way, not a good sign. You sit beside the apprentice for a moment. He hands you the clay liver, warm from the sun. It has labels: Throne of Enlil, Gate of the Storm, Path of the Underworld. You trace your finger across them and wonder how anyone ever thought this was normal. Then again, maybe that is unfair. After all, you trust your phone's weather app, and it is rarely right either. The apprentice offers a shy smile. Sometimes the livers lie. He says in a hushed voice, then glances around nervously. You nod. Even now, the wind is inconsistent, gusty one minute, gone the next. The predicted storm has not arrived. Yet, you follow the priest back outside. He is speaking with a merchant who wants to know if he should delay his boat journey south. The priest looks pained. The omens were strong, he says, but the sky is silent. And just like that, the seed of doubt begins to grow. There is tension here between belief and observation, between ancient intuition and the slow, creeping emergence of something dangerously modern, skepticism. But for now, the priest stands by his reading. The liver was clear. The gods have spoken. Whether or not the clouds agree, that is another matter entirely. You duck under a reed canopy as the first droplets finally begin to fall. Not a full storm, but enough to draw a few knowing glances among the temple goers. The priest nods once, as if to say, "Told you so." But in truth, You're still not sure whether this was divine insight or lucky timing. Back inside the temple complex, you find yourself kneeling once more beside the cold slab where yet another sheep lies ready. This time, you're here not just to witness, but to understand, really understand, what they see in that organ. Because this is not guesswork. This is the anatomy of a prophecy. The liver is already exposed. It glistens under torchlight, satin smooth and strangely symmetrical. Or it should be, because to the Babylonians, the ideal sheep liver was like a mirror, orderly, shaped just right, and disturbingly similar to a miniature map of the universe. Yes, the liver was a map. The burr leans in, carefully lifting a lobe with an ivory rod. His voice is steady. This, he murmurs, is the throne of Enlil. You peer closer. It looks like a squishy ridge of tissue. He moves the rod a little. And this is the path of storms. He is not being poetic. These are official names for liver sections. Babylonian priests developed a systematic layout of the organ, dividing it into specific zones, each assigned to a god, a force of nature, or a future event. One area might represent royal health, another might forecast war, yet another, the quality of the harvest. It was like a divine control panel, and the slightest blemish could mean catastrophe. You glance to the side, where a large clay replica of a sheep liver hangs on the wall. It is covered in tiny, wedge-shaped inscriptions, cuneiform. This is no child's model. This is a teaching tool, a blueprint, an ancient, tactile cheat sheet for the world's oldest weather reports. Historians still argue whether this mapping system was based on celestial correspondences, bodily superstitions, or just hundreds of years of trial and error. Maybe all three. What we do know is that these diviners kept records, thousands of them, observed weather, liver conditions, and resulting events. They weren't playing a guessing game. They were building data. Quirky fact: one particularly revered clay liver found in ancient Mari even had holes punched through it. Why? So the apprentice diviner could insert sticks as pointers while they studied. Basically, the Mesopotamian version of PowerPoint. The diviner points to a deep groove near the edge. If this is sunken, he says, there will be a deluge. You lean closer. The groove does look unusually deep. And if it is not? You ask. He smiles faintly. Then we keep watching. This is not faith in the modern sense. This is pattern recognition, cloaked in ceremony. You remember the phrase inscribed on the teaching tablet. If the lobe is long and the gallbladder curved, the west wind will blow, bringing heat. It's oddly precise, and yet utterly alien. They believed that the liver stored a creature's situ, its message, its spell, not a soul, but a kind of divine imprint, a link between heaven and earth. So when you opened a sheep, you were not just slicing meat. You were opening a scroll written in the god's own grammar. You sit back and try to imagine modern meteorologists doing this on live TV. And now, to tell you whether it will rain tomorrow, here's Jennifer with today's sheep liver. No thanks. But back then, this was cutting edge. The diviner's apprentice hands you a wax tablet. On it are 3 symbols, one meaning clouds, one meaning delay, and the third an ominous mark signifying divine displeasure. That last one, you're told, appears when a cyst or spot shows near the gate of the gods in the liver, which, yes, is an actual name. You flip the tablet over. On the back is a list of previously recorded readings. In the year of the lion, the liver was dry, the fields flooded within days. In the season of red stars, a twisted gallbladder warned of fire in the north. Someone actually tracked all this year after year. If nothing else, you have to admire the dedication. And then the diviner shows you something strange. A tiny lump in today's liver, barely noticeable. He frowns. This, he says, was not in yesterday's reading, which means either the gods have changed their minds, or this sheep ate something weird. You ask what happens if the signs are unclear, if the liver gives mixed signals. The priest shrugs. Then we ask again. A second sheep, maybe a third. So basically, the Mesopotamian forecast was powered by sacrifice and sample size. Outside, the wind is stronger now. Someone is tying shut their thatched roof with palm fiber rope. You think back to the first reading, the warning of lightning. You were skeptical, but now you are beginning to see it. The grooves, the ridges, the coded messages in flesh. And even if they are wrong, they are consistently wrong. And that is its own kind of knowledge. The burr whispers a few final words over the liver. Then, reverently, he wraps it in linen and places it in a clay jar. It will be buried. You do not eat prophecy. So you leave the chamber, squinting against the brighter sky. The sun is pushing through the clouds now, and whether it rains or not, one thing is clear. The liver has spoken. You are led down a shaded corridor lined with fire-blackened bricks, past a rust-colored tapestry that shows something strange, an image of a sheep's liver hovering in the sky like a moon. Beneath it are little figures pointing up at stars. The tapestry is old, even by temple standards, but its message still pulses through the bones of this place. As above, so below, as within, so without. You are about to discover the strange and surprisingly complex connection between sheep livers and constellations. The burr motions for you to sit in a room that feels like part observatory, part butcher's counter. Clay tablets are stacked neatly on the shelves, and all around are spherical star maps carved into baked earth. A liver model sits square in the middle of the floor, its surface pocked with indentations and lines scratched by careful hands. But this one's different. It has stars etched into it. See, Babylonian priests did not just poke at livers. They charted the heavens too. And they believed these two worlds, the squishy mess of entrails and the cold, glittering canopy above, were mirrors of each other. The liver, to them, was a kind of microcosm, a fleshy version of the universe, with sacred zones assigned to planets, gods, and celestial forces. They even had a name for this logic, Spu Ilni, the footsteps of the gods, and they thought the sky left footprints in every organ. The left lobe of the liver might correspond to the western sky. A dark spot there could mean a red moon, or Venus acting erratically. The caudate lobe? That was the gate of storms. linked to Jupiter's path through the constellation Pisces. You stare at a tablet inscribed with a prediction. If the bile rests on the throne of Enlil, and Mars burns in the east, the wind will tear the trees from the earth. Yikes. Historians still argue whether these astrological liver connections were more poetic than precise, or if the Babylonians truly tracked correlations over centuries of entrail readings and star movements. Some modern scholars believe it was a brilliant, if bizarre, attempt to overlay a predictable system onto total chaos. And in a way, it worked. Babylonian astronomers were far ahead of their time. They tracked the cycles of Venus, knew about lunar eclipses, and even predicted planetary conjunctions. So it is not entirely ridiculous that they thought the same divine math might show up in sheep guts. Quirky tidbit for tonight. The diviners had a special term for livers with unusual marks that did not line up with the known celestial charts. They called them orphan omens. These were treated with deep suspicion. If a reading had no precedent in the tablets, it meant the gods were improvising, and that was bad news. You walk around the liver model now, tracing the constellations scratched into its waxy surface. There is the line for Capricorn, curving delicately through the bile duct zone. There is Scorpio, spiraling outward near the gallbladder. Each one connects to a known weather pattern, a royal fate, or a seasonal omen. And if you are wondering, yes, the Babylonian sky lore was deeply tied to agriculture. A certain crescent of the liver might signify the mouth of famine, while a raised ridge might be the eye of the thunderer. You picture a diviner in 1300 BCE inspecting a particularly gnarly liver and muttering, "Well, this is going to be a spicy spring." They even aligned their temples with the stars. The ziggurats, those massive step pyramids rising from the earth like divine beacons, were often built to track solstices or rising constellations. And inside these structures, diviners compared heaven's map with the liver's code. It is almost funny, in a dreamy kind of way. Imagine a priest staring through a telescope at Jupiter, then turning to a sheep liver and saying, "Yep, matches." But this was deadly serious. Royal advisors relied on this two-part method, stars and liver, as the gold standard of weather and fate prediction. If both omens aligned, action was taken. If they conflicted, well, cue another sheep. You glance back at the tapestry hanging by the door. The sheep liver floats above the earth, surrounded by stars. The stitching is rough, the edge is curled, but the symbolism is strong. The universe is inside the body, and the body speaks back to the sky. And then the bird leans in and says something strange. When a god is silent, the liver screams louder. You blink. He explains. Sometimes, when the stars were unclear, too cloudy, too ambiguous, it was the liver alone that spoke. That meant diviners placed even more importance on the reading, even when it frightened them. Especially then, the storm is coming. The sky bruises into a smoky gray as the wind picks up speed, slapping palm fronds against temple walls. Somewhere, a cart creaks under the weight of soaked grain sacks, and a boy runs past you, yelling something about tying the goats indoors. You have not seen the actual storm yet, but you feel it like pressure behind your eyes. But here is the strange part. Some people seem calm, even smug. They had seen the sheep, or rather, they had seen the sheep's behavior. Yes, welcome to a more unsettling part of this ritual. It is not just what is inside the sheep that matters, but what happens before the knife even touches its belly. You are led to a dusty courtyard behind the temple where 2 more sheep stand tethered, awaiting their fate. A priest watches them closely, hands folded, eyes narrowed like a gambler reading cards. One of the sheep is pacing nervously. The other has urinated 3 times in 2 minutes. You raise an eyebrow. The priest nods gravely. "She knows something," he murmurs. You almost laugh. Almost. But then he starts taking notes. Because yes, the behavior of the sacrificial animal was, itself, considered prophetic. If the sheep staggered, bleated in a particular rhythm, or refused to face a certain direction, it could shift the entire interpretation of its liver. In fact, the pre-sacrifice ritual had its own vocabulary. If a sheep tripped, it might mean an enemy was plotting. If it vomited grass, that was a terrible omen. Even the way it entered the courtyard mattered. Through the north gate, likely rain. Through the south, a political upheaval. And if it refused to enter at all, the gods were not ready to speak. Historians still argue whether this level of observation was superstition, or if it reflected a broader intuition about animal behavior predicting weather. Some scientists today acknowledge that certain animals do respond to barometric changes, but whether ancient Babylonians noticed that or simply imagined connections, we may never know. Quirky tidbit. There were entire clay tablets devoted to sheep noise. Yes, clay tablets. If the sheep bleats once, then coughs, a sign of short rain. If it bleats in pairs, fire will spread in the north. Imagine being the guy who had to write that tablet. Imagine taking your sheep bleating seriously enough to record it forever in baked clay. You crouch near one of the sheep. It looks at you, seemingly calm. You wait for it to blink, twitch, chew, anything that might send a message. The priest watching it leans close and whispers, "That one has a lying tongue." You have no idea what he means, but it sounds like a problem. And then you see something remarkable. The sheep suddenly drops to its knees. No one touched it. It just folded into the dirt like a puppet without strings. The priest gasps. It submits. The storm is approved. And with that, the ritual begins. The animal is led to the sanctum, bathed, blessed, and offered incense. A sacred chant begins, not loud or musical, more like a murmur shared between gods and men. The sacrifice is swift, but reverent, no unnecessary suffering. This is a divine dialogue, not just a means to dinner. Inside the temple chamber, the liver is once again revealed, still steaming, its surface trembling slightly with residual heat. The bird begins his work. "This is the lamb of warning," he says solemnly. "The bile is green, too green." The reading is scribbled quickly onto a tablet. If the bile is overfull and discolored, the sky will break in anger. Outside, thunder rolls faintly. One crack, then another. People start pulling in their cooking pots. Even the goats are silent now. You sit with the diviners in the aftermath. The liver is wrapped, the sheep buried. A strange stillness follows. One priest runs a hand across his face and mutters, "It is done." You ask if they are afraid. One of them shrugs. "We have read the signs. The gods have spoken. If it is a storm, then it is justice. It is unsettling, this calm acceptance. But you feel something else too, a strange confidence. It is not that they know the future, it is that they feel prepared for it. The sheep told them what was coming, and that, somehow, brings peace. You close your eyes and think, maybe the sheep was right all along. You brace yourself against a stone column as the storm hits like a wave. Thunder cracks across the heavens, not once, but in a rolling succession, as though the gods are clapping slowly, mockingly. Rain lashes the temple courtyard, drenching every reed roof and clay gutter in moments. You taste grit in the air, mixed with wet ash and something metallic, maybe ozone, maybe just fear. And yet, the priests inside the ziggurat are almost smug. You remember what the bird said. The twisted hepatic duct predicted lightning. He meant it literally. Earlier, when examining the liver, he had pointed to a small spiral in the tissue near the gallbladder and declared that storms were imminent. You thought it might be a poetic flourish. Turns out, it was a meteorological forecast. This is where things get oddly specific. The Babylonians genuinely believed that each segment of the liver could signal not just a storm, but the type of storm. If the gallbladder was shrunken, it might suggest hot, dry winds. If it bulged outward, sudden downpour. If it was tilted at an angle, especially westward, brace yourself for lightning. The twisted duct you saw earlier was one of the most ominous signs. It was believed to indicate divine anger, expressed through fire from the sky. Basically, lightning bolts hurled like insults. Now, whether there's actual science to that is shaky. Historians still argue whether some of these connections were based on observed seasonal patterns, say, liver inflammation in summer leading to a memory link with dry winds, or if it was pure symbolic logic, twisting equal chaos equal thunder. But that did not stop them from making predictions with unsettling conviction. The priest you're standing beside now lifts his arms to the sky, not in panic, but in triumph. Ninurta is at war again, he says, smiling. He means the god of storms, the one with a penchant for violent weather and a habit of speaking through whirlwinds. You might think this is just some grandiose metaphor. It is not. To the Babylonians, gods were not abstract feelings. They were forces. And storms? Those were their weapons. Because when a liver omen came true, it was archived, validated, stored in what you might call a Mesopotamian data bank of divination. Quirky tidbit. Some of these clay records even had little tags that read something like, "This prediction was correct." Imagine a priest proudly stamping a tablet, verified storm. Source, goat, age 2. You duck back inside as the storm intensifies. Inside the temple, the rooms are eerily dry, as if the rain dares not cross the threshold. The floor beneath you is warm. Beneath it, they say, are chambers filled with earlier omens, jars of preserved livers, clay models with notches, and broken tablets that once read too much into a liver's red patch. One apprentice leans over and whispers a confession. Sometimes we pray for weird livers, something unusual, something that feels like a voice. You ask why. He shrugs. Because clear omens are easier to trust. If the liver looks too normal, people get nervous. The gods must be silent. It makes a twisted kind of sense. You wander into the scriptorium, where scribes are busy copying down the results of the day's reading. One clay slab reads, "Twisted duct, full bile, sudden storm from east, confirmed by lightning." It's oddly bureaucratic, like a government memo from Olympus. And now comes the part where belief starts feeding itself. The storm has arrived. The sheep liver predicted it. And everyone, every scribe, every priest, every merchant standing under a soaked awning remembers that. Next time, they will trust the liver even more. You sit down beside one of the soaked priests. He's wiping rain from his face with a bit of linen. You ask him what he really thinks. Was it divine power or coincidence? You cannot argue with that. Not tonight. Not with rain cascading from the sky like some cosmic faucet. And just as quickly as it started, the storm begins to fade. The thunder retreats, sullen. The clouds drift apart like curtains, and moonlight returns. The priests are already preparing the next sheep, because in Babylon, the question is never did the omen work? The question is, what comes next? By morning, the air smells like cooled stone and wet cedar. Pools of rainwater shimmer in the gutters, and you watch a temple scribe step around them carefully, balancing a stack of clay tablets wrapped in cloth. The sheep liver had predicted lightning. Lightning came. Now it is time to immortalize the prophecy. You follow the scribe into a lower chamber lit by oil lamps and find yourself inside a vault of knowledge. Shelves lined with clay tablets, each one etched with spiky cuneiform marks. You have entered the record hall, the ancient archive where weather predictions and divine warnings live forever in baked mud. This is no casual diary. These tablets represent centuries of collected omens. It is where liver signs were codified, compared, and cross-referenced with celestial events and historical outcomes. Together, these tablets make up a work called the Divination Compendium. If Babylon had a textbook on the divine language of entrails, this was it. A priest leans over a tablet with you and points to a line. If the finger of the liver is dark and Venus stands in the east, there will be hail in the land of Sumer. Next to it is a second line, shorter, fulfilled. You blink. This is not superstition scrawled in desperation. This is structured data. Historians still argue whether these records were used like scientific journals or more like ritual handbooks. The truth may lie somewhere in between. They were part calendar, part catalog, part cosmic filing cabinet. Each entry offered a piece of a larger pattern, an attempt to tame divine chaos with meticulous observation. Quirky tidbit. Scribes used to annotate failed omens by smashing the corner of a tablet. If a storm was predicted but never came, the clay itself was fractured, a physical mark of a broken truth. It was like slapping a red X on a forecast. You trace your fingers over the tiny incised symbols, so neat, so deliberate. Every if and then, written by someone who believed the gods spoke through sheep, clouds, and stars. But here's the most astonishing part: the scale of it all. The royal libraries at Nineveh and Babylon held thousands of these tablets, whether omens, liver readings, eclipses, earthquake signs, entire lives spent recording divine whispers. The ancient scholars were not content with vague prophecy. They wanted repeatable patterns, reference material. In a very real way, they were doing what we do now: gather data, test patterns, look for predictive results. You step aside as another scribe walks past carrying a damp cloth-wrapped tablet from last night's storm reading. It will be dried in the sun, maybe baked in a kiln, and shelved for generations. You realize that if someone stumbles into this archive 1,000 years from now, they might read your storm, the one you witnessed. Of course, not every reading made it to the shelf. There were rules. The omen had to be complete: sheep behavior, liver analysis, corresponding weather, all aligned. If a piece was missing or inconclusive, it might be rejected or filed in a doubtful section. And here is where things get even more bureaucratic. Some priests develop their own classification systems. You find a tablet with the top edge notched 3 times. That, you're told, means high-risk omens. Another tablet has a small black streak burned across the bottom. Uncertain. The priest explains. They even had separate shelves for liver anomalies caused by disease. If the sheep had a liver that was greenish or spotted in a way inconsistent with the heavens, it was sometimes considered corrupted, divine interference, or possibly sabotage. Yes, sabotage. You learn of an incident where a rival priest allegedly poisoned sheep to create false liver omens, an ancient act of spiritual fraud. The accused was exiled, his liver readings disqualified, his tablets were smashed. The stakes were that high. You glance around the record room. It is oddly quiet, like a library at the end of the world. You ask the priest if they ever worry about keeping so many ominous signs in one place. He smiles thinly. We do not keep them. We guard them. The past warns the future. Outside, the sun is returning. Water evaporates from the clay steps in shimmering waves. A fresh sheep bleats somewhere behind the temple, and a young apprentice dashes toward the reading chamber, clutching a fresh blank tablet. Another entry is about to be born. You feel a strange weight settle on your shoulders. The people here are not simply looking for signs. They are building a universe of meaning, one liver at a time. And though it seems alien, absurd even, it is also eerily familiar. Because what are modern weather reports, if not the same dream? Trying to understand a sky that refuses to speak clearly? You look at the wall of tablets again, row upon row of dusty brown prophecies. They are not just reading the weather, they are writing it. The next morning opens hot and silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. A few broken branches litter the road from last night's storm. You see a shattered oil jar, a pair of sandals abandoned in the mud. Yet in the temple complex, everything hums with purpose. The priests are already preparing for today's divination. But this time, something is different. You're ushered into a side chamber you have not seen before, smaller, darker, the air thick with smoke from burning juniper. In the center lies a sheep, not yet sacrificed, but already sacred. Around the walls are images of gods you recognize: Enlil, Marduk, Shamash, but also stranger ones: local deities, storm spirits, household gods. Today is no ordinary weather reading. Today is a ritual rereading. You are about to witness a rare but essential practice, repeating the liver omen when the gods give conflicting signs. Because despite all the careful procedures and rituals, sometimes the message just does not make sense. You remember yesterday's liver, twisted duct, swollen bile, thunder, and lightning, clear enough. But today's sky is blue, still, filled with the low drone of summer insects. The burr frowns. The reading predicted a multi-day storm, but it ended abruptly. Something is off. And when that happens, the Babylonian answer is not to shrug and move on. It is to ask again, to demand clarity from the divine. You watch as the priest paces around the sheep, whispering under his breath. Another sheep has already been selected, purifying and anointed with oils. It lies calmly as the chants rise. The burr raises his hand, and with a practiced motion, the animal is sacrificed. You do not look away. The new liver is removed and placed onto a fresh slab of dark stone. Already, you notice it looks different from yesterday's. This one has a pale spot on the left lobe, and the gallbladder is shrunken. The priest leans in and mutters something to his apprentice, who furiously scribbles symbols on a wax tablet. And then, tension. The liver contradicts the previous one. The first predicted chaos, lightning, rain, maybe even famine. But this one, it says the storm was an exception, a single outburst, no further danger. It's like the gods changed their minds overnight. Historians still argue whether such ritual rereadings were a clever form of political strategy, giving rulers the flexibility to reverse decisions, or a genuine theological belief that the gods could send mixed signals. Either way, the priests took it seriously. Quirky tidbit: there was an entire term for these contradictory omens: summa inalibi el jabasi, or if the sign does not appear in the heart. It meant the gods were withholding full clarity. Sometimes these moments were taken as signs themselves, divine indecision, or even cosmic negotiation. The burr now faces a choice: 2 readings, 2 livers, 2 futures. What do you trust? You ask him directly. He looks tired, but not uncertain. We read both, he says. Then we weigh their truth. He shows you a clay tablet etched with comparison symbols, columns for liver readings, rows for events. It looks like a spreadsheet from a forgotten world. He marks an X under storm continues and a second under storm ends. They will observe the sky for another day before declaring one of the livers correct. Until then, both predictions stand like rival candidates waiting to be crowned. This wait and see approach might seem cautious, but it was deeply meaningful. To the Babylonians, The gods did not lie, but their truths could be layered, conditional, or postponed. An omen that makes no sense now might reveal its purpose later, or it might not be your omen at all. That was another layer of complexity, personal versus communal omens. If you sacrificed a sheep for yourself, say, to see if your trade caravan would arrive safely, that reading applied to you. But a temple reading, done on behalf of the city, that was everyone's business. So now, the city waits. You join a group gathered outside the temple steps. Farmers, merchants, soldiers. One man asks, "Which reading is true?" A priest replies, "The sky will tell us." A woman shakes her head and says, "It already did." You realize then that prophecy is not just in the liver or the stars. It is in the people's reaction. If they believe the danger has passed, they will plant again, rebuild their stalls, send their children to gather reeds by the river. If they believe another storm is coming, they will stockpile food, tether their animals, and pray. Sometimes, belief is the storm, and just as you're thinking this, a gust of hot wind sweeps through the courtyard. The people pause. Everyone looks up. A single dark cloud slides across the sun like a lid placed over a pot. The priest squints at it, says nothing. You wonder which liver it confirms. You wake the next day to the smell of hot dust and roasted dates, the kind that fills your nose and tells you the heat will be cruel. The storm is long gone now. No trace of rainwater, no wind, not even a leaf out of place. It is as if the sky had a tantrum, then quietly slipped away without apology. And yet in the temple, the debate is still raging. You return to the reading chamber and find the two liver tablets side by side. Yesterday's reading warned of continued storms. Today's said otherwise. The priests have begun what you might call divinatory arbitration, comparing both readings line by line, omen by omen, liver by liver. This is where it gets wonderfully obsessive. Each part of the liver has a name, a reputation, and a kind of legal standing. If one area, say, the finger of Shamash, shows chaos in one reading but calm in another, the priests must interpret which God's voice carries more weight in that context. Sometimes, it is not about which liver is right. It is about which God is louder. You sit with an older burr, his fingers stained with ink and sheep bile, as he walks you through the logic. In yesterday's liver, he explains, the path of Adid was swollen, but today, the mirror of sin is unmarked. He pauses. Adid governs the storm. Sin governs the sky. If one cries and the other is silent, we must ask, which domain does this event belong to? You blink. You thought weather was just weather. But no, in this cosmology, every natural phenomenon is supervised. Wind, sun, lightning, even dew, they each belong to a god. So deciding which divine office the storm falls under affects how the omen is read. It is like consulting different departments of the same bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether these detailed interpretations were mostly theological speculation or a genuine effort to parse complex natural systems. After all, If you divide a sheep liver into 50 symbolic zones and cross-reference each with astronomy, you are essentially creating a multivariable predictive model, just with more bleeding. Quirky tidbit. Priests sometimes invoke the ritual of reconciliation, where they would symbolically merge two contradictory omens by sacrificing a third sheep. It was a divine tiebreaker. Today, that's exactly what's about to happen. You follow the procession as a third sheep is brought forward. This one is older, with thick curls and a gold-dyed collar, chosen for its perceived wisdom. Yes, really. Some believed older sheep carried clearer messages, as if the gods trusted mature vessels more. The sacrifice is quiet, solemn, and fast. The liver is removed and studied instantly. You step in close. The burr's hands hover over the organ like a pianist about to play. He points at the bile duct, half full. Good. The field of Ninorta, smooth. Excellent. Then his finger halts. The window of Enlil has a tiny tear, almost invisible. But to him, it is everything. His voice drops. This is a mixed sign, he murmurs. The storm will return, but not for us. You frown. What do you mean? He smiles grimly. It is moving on. The gods have chosen another place to strike, and there it is, one of the strangest beliefs of Babylonian liver divination, that omens could be displaced. The signs you read might not apply to your city, but to your enemies. The sheep's liver was like a postcard from the gods, sometimes misaddressed. It is both brilliant and terrifying, because it means you can never be completely sure whether the sign is about you. The priests now begin what looks like a ritual of dismissal. The clay tablets from the first two readings are placed into a jar and sealed, not destroyed, but put aside, archived for reference, one scribe mutters. The third reading, the tiebreaker, is written on a fresh tablet in crisp, fast strokes. And then the official pronouncement is made. The danger has passed, but not without consequence. The people will be told by evening. You walk outside. The sky is painfully clear, flat, bright, and humming with heat. But somewhere, a priest is already making a list of what offerings should be made in gratitude. Storms that bypassed you still demand thanks, because the gods are not just speaking through the sheep, they are listening too. You find yourself staring at the horizon, where the flat brown of the desert meets a pale, shivering band of heat. The storm is gone, the omens resolved, the liver's red, but something else lingers, something quiet and unspoken. You begin to wonder, what happens when the gods stop speaking altogether? The Burr calls this phenomenon the silence of the signs. He tells you it happens rarely, but when it does, it chills even the most seasoned diviner. Because for a culture that lives and breathes prophecy, divine silence is not peace, it is terror. You're invited into a small, incense-heavy chamber at the rear of the temple, rarely visited, except when the usual methods fail. The walls are lined with clay models of deformed livers, malformed lungs, and even damaged hearts. These are non-signs, organs that came from sacrifices, but bore no readable omen. The priest explains, sometimes the gods withhold their voice. Sometimes they test us. You think that sounds eerily similar to a weatherman saying, "Sorry, the clouds have gone into hiding." The reality is more unnerving. You're shown a tablet dated some 300 years earlier. It reads, 3 sheep, no mark, no signal, no voice. We await punishment. It is both a report and a confession. Imagine sacrificing 3 animals, looking deep into their insides, and finding nothing. No discoloration, no asymmetry, no divine fingerprints, just silence. Historians still argue whether these silent omens were rare anomalies due to healthy animals or deliberate stagecraft to maintain priestly authority. After all, when the gods go quiet, only the bravest priest is willing to say, "We do not know." Quirky tidbit. To break a silence, priests sometimes staged emergency omens, sacrificing a rare, exotic animal like a gazelle or even a white dove to see if the gods were just tired of sheep. It rarely worked, but it gave everyone the illusion of control. Today, the priests suspect silence is near. The last reading was clear, but the sky does not reflect it. The heat has not broken. No wind has returned. The trees are still too still. Something feels paused, and now the tension begins to spread. A merchant closes his stall early. A farmer refuses to water his barley. A mother lights a second oil lamp at her home shrine, whispering not to her ancestors, but directly to the gods. "Speak to us again," she murmurs. In a society built around communication with the divine, silence is a threat. It makes people restless. It makes them dangerous. You watch a scribe hesitating with his stylus. Should he record the day's conditions or wait for an official reading? He glances at the sky again, shrugs, begins writing anyway. "Better a flawed record," he says, "than a blank one." You ask a priest what they do in a prolonged silence. He doesn't answer at first. Then he leads you outside to a place you have not seen before. A fenced-off area behind the temple, bare except for a low, circular platform made of fired brick. There is nothing on it. Not now. But the bird tells you it is called the listening ground. Here, when omens fail to appear, priests sit in silence. No sacrifices, no questions, just watching, waiting, listening for a sign that might come in a dream, in a falling bird, in the crack of baked earth. It is a ritual without ritual. He sits beside you on the edge of the platform. The sun bears down. Sweat beads at your neck. And still, the sky says nothing. "I once waited here 3 days," he says. On the 4th, a dust devil tore across the courtyard. It pulled down a flag and scattered the offering jars. That was our omen. We read it as a warning. He pauses. It turned out to be true. It sounds ridiculous. It also sounds completely reasonable. That's the power of silence. It forces you to see meaning in the meaningless. A bird lands on the edge of the wall, tilts its head, and flies off. You and the priest both notice. You do not speak of it. But in your bones, you both wonder, was that it? Was that the sign? You stand up, dusting off your hands. The priest remains seated. "If the gods do not speak," he says, "then the world must whisper for them." That thought stays with you as you walk back into the temple. Because sometimes prophecy is not about hearing the gods. Sometimes it is about listening to the silence they leave behind. You wake the next morning to the sound of hooves on stone. Not a stampede. No, something slower, methodical. You lean out the temple window and see a procession approaching the gates. A delegation from a neighboring city-state. Their robes are stiff with embroidery, their sandals dusty from the road, and at the center of the group, a cage. Inside it, a ram, a very expensive one, by the looks of it. The priests rush to meet them. You're invited to observe, though warned to stay silent. This is sacred diplomacy, liver diplomacy, to be precise. Today, you're witnessing one of the strangest and most politically charged rituals in the Babylonian world. Commissioned omens. The neighboring city is facing drought. Their crops are failing, and they believe it is not just a weather problem. It is a cosmic one. Maybe the gods are angry. Maybe someone cursed the irrigation priests. Maybe they offended a star. So they have come here to this temple because your birth has a reputation. His liver readings are considered unusually accurate. His omens have saved cities, or so the clay tablets say. The visiting party places their offering before the temple, gifts of figs, silver, dyed wool. In return, they ask a single question. Will the drought break? And to answer that, a sheep must die. You are brought into the chamber with the ram. He's older than most sacrificial animals, his horns painted with a faint blue dye. The burr circles him slowly, chanting. The visitors watch closely. Every motion, every glance matters, because when politics and prophecy collide, truth becomes performance. Historians still argue whether these diplomatic liver readings were genuine divinations or strategic theater, rituals performed not just for the gods, but for morale, influence, and control. Either way, everyone here believes in what is about to happen. The ram is sacrificed. The liver is placed carefully on a golden tray. It is enormous, thick and veined, with deep reddish tones that shimmer under the torchlight. The burr begins his examination. You hear murmurs from the delegation. They're nervous. Their priest steps forward to watch. A second priest from your temple stands beside him. This is standard protocol. Every reading must be witnessed by both parties to prevent misinterpretation. Or, let's be honest, cheating. And this is where things get weirdly bureaucratic again. Each point of the liver is announced aloud. The path of Ishtar, smooth. The gate of Ea, discolored. The bowl of Nergal, cracked. For each, the apprentice scribes away on wax tablets, diagramming the liver's topography like a map. You lean in. The bowl of Nergal is important. It corresponds to disease and drought. A crack there? Not a great sign. Quirky tidbit. Some priests believe cracks on the liver were literally caused by divine lightning. Microscopic bolts hurled into the organ at the moment of death to encode the god's message. Modern science might call them stress fissures. The priests called them omens. The burr concludes his reading. The drought will not end for 3 moons, but there is no death among your children. The gods are patient, not cruel. A mixed omen. The visiting delegation seems relieved. They had feared famine. The reading implies only delay. Still, they ask the bird to bless them. He does, by anointing their priest with oil and pressing a hand to the man's chest. This, too, is part of the ritual, the physical transfer of understanding, a symbolic bridge between the God who spoke and the city that must now listen. You watch as the liver is preserved in wax. Yes, they do that sometimes for high-profile readings. It will be stored in a jar and sent back with the visitors, a kind of divine receipt, proof that the gods had, indeed, spoken to Babylon. And just like that, the delegation bows, collects its gifts, and departs. But before they leave, one of them, an older woman with a sand-worn face, pulls you aside. She presses a tiny token into your palm, a bit of baked clay, shaped like a liver. For luck, she says, so that the gods speak clearly to you when it matters. You keep it, because you're starting to realize these liver readings are not just predictions. They're agreements, contracts between humans and heaven. And whether performed in fear, hope, desperation, or diplomacy, they are all, at heart, just another way of asking, are we going to be okay? Outside, the sun climbs higher, and somewhere in the city, a new sheep is being prepared. The day is slow, sweltering, and strangely quiet. You wander the temple corridors, listening to the scrape of sandals on stone and the distant gurgle of irrigation channels being cleared. After the high drama of the diplomatic omen, today feels like a lull. But you know better now. In Babylon, nothing is just quiet. Nothing is just routine. You end up in a sun-dappled corner of the temple garden, where a group of apprentices are practicing, get this, liver reading with clay models. Yes, that is a thing. Scattered across the courtyard are dozens of fake sheep livers, hand-molded in reddish-brown clay, each one marked with tiny symbols, circles, ridges, notches. They look like organic circuit boards. One apprentice reads aloud, "If the finger of Shamash is short and the finger of Adid is split, a wind will tear the harvest." You raise an eyebrow. The instructor shrugs. Better to get it wrong on clay than on sheep. You realize what you're witnessing. The education system of a professional diviner. A school of omens, where priests in training spend years memorizing patterns, practicing symbolic interpretations, and learning not just how to read the signs, but how to speak them out loud with absolute authority. Because in Babylon, confidence is half the ritual. Historians still argue whether these training programs were based more on rote memorization or actual observation. Some believe that apprentices were chosen for their recallability, like human databases. Others think the best ones simply had a knack for connecting patterns, storytelling, and celestial logic. Quirky tidbit. Babylonian omen schools had oral exams. Yes. A senior priest would place a clay liver in front of a student and say, "Speak the sign." The apprentice had to walk through the full omen chain without stuttering. If he faltered, back to sweeping the goat pens. You sit down beside a younger student named Ilyumashu. He shows you his wax tablet, where he's been practicing drawing liver maps. Each zone has a god's name: Marduk, Nergal, Ea, Kula. The zones are not arbitrary. They're celestial, arranged to mirror the heavens. The liver, after all, is not just flesh. It is a microcosm. He points to a cracked notch near the center and says, "That's the path of Marduk. If it's broken, the city's ruler may fall." You nod solemnly. You do not tell him the earlier. A temple goat tripped on a step and snapped the model in half. The instructor claps. A new exercise begins. One apprentice plays the burr, one the scribe, one the inquiring noble. It is theater, yes, but theater that trains. The pretend burr raises a fake liver and declares in a solemn tone, "If the bile is shadowed, the river will overflow and rats will flee." The scribe nods. The noble asks if it will affect the barley prices. The group erupts in laughter. Even here, in play, the stakes are understood, because one day, one of these kids might be standing before a king, and if that king hears the wrong omen, people die. You find the instructor again. You ask what makes a good diviner. He doesn't hesitate. Memory, calm, and the ability to say, "I do not know," without fear. That last part surprises you. He notices, shrugs. The gods do not always speak clearly. Pretending they do is worse than silence. You watch as Ilumashu carefully wraps his clay model in cloth. It will dry overnight, and tomorrow he will mark it again, overlaying another scenario. It's a mix of anatomy lesson, theological essay, and performance rehearsal. You ask if the students ever see real sacrifices. Only after 3 years. The instructor says, "They must earn the blood." That phrase stays with you, "earn the blood." Because in this city, interpreting a liver is not just knowledge. It is permission. Permission to speak for the gods. Permission to write the future. You walk back through the training court, listening to the next round of practice readings. They sound almost musical, like liturgy composed in the language of flesh and smoke. Somewhere above, a hawk circles. You glance at it, then at the clay livers, then at Ilumashu, who catches your eye and grins. You grin back, because now you understand. Prophecy is not a gift, it is a skill. And like any skill, it must be sharpened again and again and again. The temple is quieter tonight, not silent. No, Babylon never sleeps entirely, but the rhythm has slowed. You can feel it in your bones. The heat has broken. The torches burn lower. And most curiously, the burr has invited you somewhere new. You follow him through a back corridor, past the incense chamber, and into a narrow spiral stairwell carved into the ziggurat side. Tonight, he says, you learn about the sky. You reach the rooftop, high above the city, where the air is thinner, cleaner. Before you lies a stone platform marked with concentric circles and tiny, carved symbols, each one corresponding to a star or planet. You are now standing on the observational deck of the temple astrologers. Wait, astrology? Yes, because in Babylon, the liver and the sky are partners. This is where it gets especially fascinating. While the priests read sheep livers for immediate signs, weather, illness, divine anger, the astrologers track celestial omens for broader trends, dynastic fates, city fortunes, seasonal shifts. The idea was simple: as above, so within. The stars were the long-distance messengers. The liver? That was the local newspaper. You look up. The sky is unclouded, scattered with 1,000 cold lights. The bird joins you. "See that one?" he asks, pointing. "Ninurta's star. When it vanishes, floods will follow. When it flickers, kings will fall." You notice that many of these stars have names, personalities, histories. They are not dead matter. They are celestial witnesses. The astrologers keep track of their movements, noting conjunctions, disappearances, or sudden brightenings. Each has a meaning. Each is archived. Historians still argue whether Babylonian astrology influenced the liver readings directly, or if they evolved side by side. What is clear? In some temples, the Bur could not finalize a liver reading without consulting the stars. Yes, really, a sheep liver could contradict the sky, but it rarely did, because the gods do not argue with themselves. Quirky tidbit. There was a recorded case of a priest who refused to perform a liver divination because Venus had risen too early. He claimed the gods were not yet awake. His refusal was documented and incredibly respected. Tonight, you witness the process for yourself. A star chart is unrolled. The astrologer calls out planet positions. The scribe records them. Then the Bur references yesterday's liver. Twisted duct, warning of unrest. The stars now show Mars ascending in Leo, a placement associated with conflict and stubborn kings. Combined, the signs spell tension. And here's where things get even more Babylonian. The Bur doesn't stop at predicting unrest. He predicts which city, based on the direction Mars rose in, and which liver zone aligned with it. He declares, Uruk will suffer betrayal within the moon's turn. Just like that, a city's fate whispered into being by a goat's liver and a planet's path. You ask, and if they're wrong? He smiles. Then we misunderstood the message. The gods are never wrong. Only our ears. You let that sink in. This isn't science. It isn't mysticism either. It's somewhere in between, a blend of structured ritual and poetic logic, the divine written in flesh and flame mirrored by stars. He hands you a tiny stylus. Mark your own prediction, he says. You hesitate, then carve a small symbol near the southern horizon, the spot where a red star flares low. You write in your own quiet voice. Change comes with dust. You don't even know what it means. Yet, the priest nods solemnly, says nothing. The rooftop is windier now. Below, the city glows with lamplight and cooking fires. Somewhere, a sheep bleats in the dark, and overhead, the stars just keep spinning. Slow, patient, distant gods that never blink. You realize you are no longer just watching. You are participating. You are part of the chain that links sky, flesh, and fate. Because in Babylon, every sign matters, even the one you wrote just now. Dawn seeps into the temple like oil into linen, slow, golden, and heavy with promise. You wander the lower levels, expecting calm, but find the air buzzing with low murmurs. Something is happening. You follow the sound to the southern gate, where two priests are conferring in hushed voices over a cloth-wrapped bundle. The cloth is wet. It drips red onto the floor. Another sheep? You glance inside. No, not just any sheep. This one was sacrificed in secret. That is when the Bur arrives, his jaw set. He pulls you aside and mutters unauthorized divination. Then he sighs, "Come, you should see this." And suddenly you are caught in the dark undercurrent of Babylon's divinatory system. Forbidden omens. You are led to a chamber that feels off. The torches are placed low. The air smells of panic and sweat. On the central slab lies the liver from the unauthorized reading, fresh, oddly marked, and already causing trouble. Here's the story. A minor noble, worried about an upcoming marriage alliance, bribed a junior priest to perform a private omen. It went badly. The liver showed danger in the shadow of Gula, a sign often tied to sudden illness or treachery. The noble panicked, and now the temple has found out. You might think, what's the big deal? A concerned citizen wants divine advice, but in Babylon, unsanctioned liver readings are dangerous. Why? Because the gods are listening. And when someone bypasses the official channels, it is considered both offensive and reckless, like trying to hack into a sacred computer and accidentally triggering a flood warning. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were about theological purity or just political control. Either way, the reaction is swift. The junior priest is dragged before the high clergy. He doesn't deny it. "I wanted to help," he says. He was desperate. Quirky tidbit. There was an old Babylonian belief that unsanctioned omens could poison the air. People would burn juniper near the reading site to purify it, just in case the gods got confused or angry. That is exactly what's happening now. You watch as the liver is carefully removed, placed in a clay jar, and sealed with bitumen. The wax tablet containing the forbidden reading, it is shattered by the temple's chief priest. Then a new ritual begins, not one of divination, but of correction. You're told this is known as importu, the ritual of divine clarification. A sanctioned priest will now perform a cleansing sacrifice, not to gain new prophecy, but to override the false one. You follow them into a purifying chamber where the proper sacrifice is carried out. This time, everything is done by the book. The sheep is bathed. The knife is sanctified. The chants are flawless. And then the liver is read. The new omen is neutral. No signs of illness. No signs of betrayal. It is, in effect, a divine reset button. The high priest declares, "The gods accept no previous communication on this matter." That means, ignore the first reading. It did not happen. But of course, it did happen. The noble who requested it is not punished. Not openly. But a message is sent. He will be watched. And no marriages will be blessed until a full moon cycle passes, just to be safe. You ask the Bur what would have happened if the unauthorized omen had predicted something good. "We'd still burn it," he says. Even good lies are dangerous. That rattles you a little, not because it sounds harsh, but because it sounds familiar. Even now, in a world filled with forecasts, analytics, and AI-generated predictions, we still argue over who gets to say what is true. The Babylonians just wrapped that struggle in sheep guts and holy fire. As the day stretches on, the temple calms. The forbidden omen is buried deep in a sealed jar vault, never to be spoken of again. But you cannot stop thinking about it. That liver, that moment, that single flawed question that triggered an entire city's system of spiritual failsafes. It proves something crucial. In Babylon, prophecy is power, and like all power, it must be guarded, sharpened, sanctioned, and kept far from the trembling hands of panic. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the stone corridors, you realize just how high the stakes have always been, not just for those reading the signs, but for those believing them. You head to your chamber, mind swirling, and somewhere beneath your feet, sealed in clay and buried in silence, a forbidden liver still waits for someone to remember it. The air is warm tonight, but not harsh. A kind of softness has settled over the city, like the sky has finally exhaled. You sit on the temple roof again, the stars overhead blinking like ancient eyes. Below, the lamps flicker, the priests sleep, even the sheep seem quiet. You are not here to read a liver tonight. You are here to say goodbye. Your apprenticeship, or whatever strange journey this has been, is nearing its end. You have seen the sacrifice, the symbols, the confusion. You have learned how the Babylonians read the will of the gods, not through thunder or fire, but through the pulsing folds of an animal's liver. And now, like all things, it must conclude. But the Burr has one final lesson for you. He hands you a tablet, old, worn, slightly chipped. You run your fingers over it. The markings are dense, written in cuneiform, so fine it looks like braided thread. You ask what it says. He replies, it is not a prophecy. It is a memory. And then he begins to tell you the story, not of a reading, but of a mistake. Years ago, he says, a storm was coming. The skies were split by fire. The winds screamed. A reading was done by him. The livers showed clear skies. The priests rejoiced. The crops were uncovered. The people danced. And then the flood came. It destroyed granaries, drowned livestock, even swept away part of the ziggurat steps. People died, and the priests? They said nothing. They burned the tablets. They performed rites of atonement. They claimed the gods had changed their minds. But inside, he tells you, we knew. I had read the liver wrong. You ask why he is telling you this now. He looks up at the sky, because the gods are not puzzles to solve. They are mysteries to serve. And when you forget that, even a perfect omen can lead you astray. There is no ceremony tonight, no chants, no torches, just the hum of the wind. He gives you the stylus and says, right. You hesitate, but you do. You press into the wax tablet, one tiny symbol at a time, copying a simple phrase. The storm was real. The reading failed. May the gods forgive. You finish it and hand it back. He does not read it. He does not need to. He places it gently in a jar and seals it with clay. And then he says the words you have waited to hear. You have learned the signs. You have seen the sky. You may go. No fanfare, no applause. But the permission is enough. Historians still argue whether these rituals ever truly worked, whether the liver knew anything, whether the stars spoke, whether the gods answered. But after all you have seen, you no longer ask whether the signs were real. You ask only whether they were heard. Quirky final thought. Archaeologists once found a Babylonian tablet that simply read, "There were too many signs. We chose none." You like that. You do not know if it was despair or wisdom. Maybe both. You walk down from the rooftop slowly. The stones warm under your feet. The temple is still, but it breathes. A place of blood and stars, of whispered futures and forgotten sheep. You know you will remember it, because in the end, prophecy is not just a glimpse of tomorrow. It is a mirror for today. And sometimes, when the liver is dark and the sky is silent, all you have is that mirror. You step out into the night, the gates closing behind you. The city exhales, and somewhere, just beyond the rooftops, a ram begins to bleat. You walk now slowly down the quiet stone streets of a city that no longer feels foreign. The night presses gently on your shoulders like a soft blanket, and the heat of the day has finally loosened its grip. Somewhere behind you, the temple sleeps, the priests sleep, even the gods, if they do sleep, have drawn their curtains and turned away. But the signs still hum in your memory, the flicker of firelight on a glistening liver, the murmur of an omen whispered through cracked lips, the press of a stylus into warm wax. The world feels quieter now, not empty, just quieter, like the gods have finished speaking, at least for tonight. You pass by the gate where the sheep once entered, the ground still darkened from ancient stains. You hear only the soft rhythm of your own breath, in and out. Your hands are empty, your mind full. And as you look up, the stars above do not blink or shout or swirl with purpose. They simply shine, cold, distant, patient. You smile at them and they do not answer. But that is all right, because sometimes the answer is not in the voice. It is in the silence that follows. So rest now. Let your thoughts settle like dust on an altar. Let your breath ease. Let your limbs unwind. Let the questions go, one by one, like birds released before dawn. You have walked through blood and prophecy, through fire and mystery, and come out whole. And tomorrow the world will ask its questions again. But for now, for tonight, you are safe. You are heard. You are home. Good night.